Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Radhika Dalakia-Lipton, and I'm the CEO of Parama Partners. We're a compliance consulting firm for credit unions. We know you have a lot going on, and we deeply appreciate your time today. This is the first of our Moving Forward webinar series, and we're also currently streaming live on Facebook at Parama Partners. First, let me begin by expressing my sincerest hope that each of you joining us today and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and encouraged that the worst of the pandemic is behind us. As you have heard, this is truly unprecedented times, and we are extremely grateful for the hard work and dedication of all our first responders, doctors, and nurses who have put their whole lives on hold just to ensure our safety and well-being. As a new normal evolves, and states are beginning to reopen their doors for business, we are challenged with new sets of issues, such as the recent increase in pandemic fraud, and the Department of Justice is now focused on new cyber and consumer fraud. If your credit union has been offering PPP loans, the credit department, as you know, have been working night and day lately, and now you are challenged on how to effectively monitor the use of those funds. And last but not least, I know that CEOs and management are greatly concerned about their employees and how to safely encourage them back to work while implementing the most stringent of safety standards for their continued well-being. We here at Parama are committed to helping you in any way possible. We will stay abreast of all the changes in risk and compliance as they emerge and keep you updated and well-informed. Parama Partners delivers compliance assistance and resources to help credit unions manage the regulatory landscape and from help desk support to customized consulting and auditing. I am so thrilled today to have our senior compliance team with us today to share their expertise. There's no way we can possibly cover everything that's going on in 1 hour, so please feel free to send us your questions and we will reply to them as quickly as possible. During the webinar, we are going to be asking a series of poll questions. You will have 20 seconds as soon as the poll is being offered, and then we will display the results of the poll. We will also include the results at the end with the PowerPoint that we'll email out to you. Also, please note that currently everyone is muted. If you have any questions, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We promise to answer as many questions as we can during the presentation. If not, we will definitely respond by email. So again, our series today is Reducing Risk in the Post-Pandemic Environment. First up, we have Gary Pennington and John Mason. Gary oversees our attestation and internal audit services. John has over 25 years experience in financial services, internal audit, SSAE 18, information systems, and investigation. Has held many positions such as Chief Internal Auditor, Chief Information Security Officer for multi-billion-dollar credit unions. So with that, I will hand it off to the two gentlemen.
Thank you, Radhika. First off, I want to thank everybody for showing up today. It's a real joy to see that you're taking the time out of your busy day to spend some time with us, and I want to hopefully give you some insight into what we are seeing and what we're thinking are going to be some emerging topics to consider for what we do after the pandemic is over. So, what I want to start with is really, it's almost a foundational thing, and try to discuss briefly what a business continuity plan involves, and that way everybody can kind of understand probably where we're coming from on this and what the critical pieces of having a good solid foundation are. First and foremost, this is a continuous process. So realize that this isn't one of those things where you put it on you finish the process, you put it on your shelf, and then you're done with it. It's something that you're continuously going through, evolving, updating, monitoring, and making sure that you've got the most precise information in there as possible. It's a living process, and in order to make it work, it can't be something that's based on information that's 2 to 3, 4 years old. You have to make sure that you're constantly making sure that what you really want to do as a reaction to something, an event, really is precise and is timely. So as you can see, we've got a diagram up here of what the business continuity life cycle is. One of the key points of this, and one of the key starting points, is really doing a very good, what they call a business impact analysis. And what that does is it really looks at your critical services and determines what of those critical services could be impacted if there was some sort of outage or some sort of delay in their services, or God forbid, the crisis hits. What can you live without, and what do you have to do to be in the best possible position to deliver to your customers? So one of the things to consider is why you're doing that business impact analysis, and really is a matter of taking those assets that you've got in the company and saying, what are the most important to us? Once you've kind of done that real quick analysis, then you have to kind of figure out what is the minimum amount of time that we can continue without those services. So you have a sort of a restoration time, if you will, of how long do you expect to be down, or how long can you expect to be down? Once you've kind of identified all that, the next really the real foundational piece of this is to do a risk assessment against that and say, what types of risks are we looking at that could potentially shut those assets or shut those services down? And then you have to, it's a really a scenario based sort of process. You can kind of think of it from all different angles. For example, if you have a natural disaster, what type of facilities do you have that could be in for example, in a tornado zone? Or what type of services are in, a floodplain or anything like that. So you really have to think about what, from an environmental standpoint, could be potentially impacted. From a theft standpoint, what's vulnerable to theft? That can also be something where you need to, where it could actually impact your business and shut your business down. If it's a significant theft. A third area might be cybercrime or a breach. That's one that we see constantly, and the threat is always out there and is always persistent. So you have to be monitoring, your threat environment and determining what is at risk and what risks are to you. And obviously the pandemic, this is one that a lot of people didn't see coming, and the playbook really wasn't written for this one. If it was, people really didn't have a very good one. So it's a matter of kind of considering the what ifs and doing a constant radar evaluation, if you will, of what's going on. Because you'll see something ahead of time and think that it can impact your business. Getting an early jump on it is going to be critical. So if something's out there, make sure it gets included in your risk assessment. Third piece of this puzzle of really building your business continuity processes is really put that down into a formalized plan. And that includes a lot of different pieces. I mean, for example, it includes the plan itself, which says, this is what we do. Now, it doesn't have to be overly complicated or overly detailed, because as everybody knows, the plans we've written today change in an instant. So it doesn't really have to be to the granular level that you would expect, but it does have to have some sort of context of a framework that allows people to know what to do in an event of emergency, know who to contact. And that needs to be really several methods of communications. For example, if you just have an email for somebody and email goes down, then what's your plan B to reach them? Do you go to cell phones? Do you go to landlines? Do you go to smoke signals or whatever? I don't know. But you have to have different ways to reach people through websites or whatever type of communication that is. And then making sure that you've trained your people on that process. That's the third critical piece of this, is really making sure that people know what they're doing, know what the plan entails, and know what they're supposed to do in the event of it. And then the final piece of this puzzle is to really do a formal implementation analysis and really kind of proof it out to say, does it work? And that would involve doing things on, say, for example, a tabletop exercise where you lay out the plan and kind of bulletproof it and make sure that, it can be approached from different angles, and what's your weakest point. And if you take one of those pieces of failure and it doesn't work, then you go through the process again and constantly improve it. So a tabletop exercise or a live drill are always the most important ways to kind of get feedback on that loop to make sure that you're doing things properly. So at that point, I think we kind of gone through the process. I'd like to introduce our first polling question at this point in time. So it'll pop up on the screen here, and then you'll have a little bit of time to respond to it, and we'll move on to the next area.
Okay, so your first poll question is, when was the last time you did a BIA? Within the past year, past 3 years, haven't done one, or you're not sure? If you can go ahead and click on the poll, you got 20 seconds. That's real good, 40% within the past year, and then within at least half of them within the past 3 years. Those who haven't done one or are unsure, I'm sure you'll be certainly looking to go ahead and do that real soon, especially as we go forward and try and prepare for what's coming up next in the second wave. Gary?
So really, what did we learn from this pandemic, and what did we learn from this process that we've been through as a community and as businesses? And what can we take from that and put back into that business continuity plan, and what can we put into our improved processes to make us better going forward? I think everybody got impacted differently. So this is a process that is very unique to everybody, and it's something that we're going to have to look at as individuals, but really looking at what you're dependent upon from a services standpoint and from your critical supply chain and in your services and things that you rely on. No company is an island at this point in time. So obviously everybody is interdependent upon certain things, be that maybe your data center, for example. Have you got adequate, or do they have an adequate backup? So in this process, we're only as strong as our weakest link in this. So if you have a vendor who doesn't have a very strong or robust business continuity plan, then you don't have a very strong or robust business continuity plan, because you're going to be at their mercy. So really taking a good look at those vendors and evaluating what they do, and how they do it, and what's their plan to react to any type of emergency on their standpoint. Fortunately, unfortunately, this isn't the easiest thing to do in a lot of cases, but there are some tools out there that probably a lot of you are aware of, and that would include looking at the SOC 2 reports, or in some cases a SOC 1 report from those critical vendors, to make sure that they've been through, their control environment has been tested, and that it's reliable, and that it's stood up to the test of scrutiny. And a SOC 2 audit is really an audit of your vendors, that they go through them with a third party, and they'll provide you with a formal report that says that they have actually had their environment tested, and that they can certify that it definitely has some controls in place. Now, it doesn't mean that everything from a disaster recovery standpoint is solid, because some of those controls in there aren't necessarily disaster recovery related, but they do give you clues and insight into how the business operates and how they are set up for the future. And then the last point is really to define any points of single point of failure in your system, and make sure that, if you have some, that you may want to create some redundancies or some other alternatives to address those, and that you don't have a single point of failure that could potentially shut your business down. So what do we do at the next point? What are we doing at the next level to prepare for that next wave? We've heard that the fall wave of COVID-19 might be coming around, and the fall might be just as bad. So from this unique perspective of what do we do about this one is really employee based. Obviously, if an employee gets sick or gets ill, that takes down that, that employee's ability to perform. So what you want to do in this case is really make sure that your employee processes around how you handle employees and how you allow them to function in virtual environments or environments that they normally wouldn't be able to is critical, because you have to maintain flexibility. So that would entail just making sure that they can be that your networks are available to work from a remote standpoint. That if you do have a situation where people are working close together after they get back up and running, and somebody does come down with sick, does get sick, then you have a way to isolate them, and so that you don't contaminate everybody else. And making sure that you've got policies and procedures on the new normal of working from home. We're all working from home these days, but is there a set of policies and procedures that still kind of dictate how your structure, your company allows them to work and allows them to function in that environment, and make sure that you've got everything in place to protect the company and also protect the company, the employees. Lastly, I want to make sure that you kind of cover the revising that the making sure that the employees from a staffing standpoint, that you've got cross training in place, and make sure that people can receive appropriate training on how to evacuate the buildings or maintain safety requirements, because obviously that's the most important thing. And the key component is safety, making sure that people are aware of what they need to do to stay safe and to keep others safe while they're at work. And then lastly, I think the communication is probably the most important part of this as well, is just making sure that people get the right communication from the company, and that you are communicating on a consistent basis to them. So I think at this point we're want to kind of tee up our next polling question. And
so when was the last time you performed a BCP or DR exercise? Within the past year, past 3 years, haven't done one, or unsure? You have 20 seconds. Please put in your answers. Oops, it was there momentarily. There it is. Okay, so good. That's great that at least half of you have done it within the past year, 58% within 3 years. For those who haven't done one, you certainly do want to do one as soon as you can from there, to make sure things do work from there. And those who are unsure, want to check into that, or maybe we can help you out. Thank you. Radhika?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, John. Next up, we have Rosemarie Flisco. She's a former compliance officer of several very large credit unions in California. Rose has managed all aspects of risk management and fraud, so I'll hand it off to Rose.
Thank you, Radhika. Let's talk about the best practices in reopening. Even though credit unions were deemed as essential, I'm sure that we're not all operating as business as usual. So each of us probably formed a task force. The task force should consist of all different departments there at the credit union, including risk compliance, and of course, HR should be a part of that. First, what you should do is consult your state, county, and city government requirements, and of course, your local health department for their recommendations. Come together as a team and discuss which of those recommendations and requirements you're going to be implementing, and your plan should be written. You don't want to be reopening because, without a written plan with checklists, assignments, duties, things of that nature, without, really giving a lot of thought into it, because your members and the public are looking to see how you're going to handle the situation. And one thing that I ask that you keep in mind is to focus on empathy. It's important that you communicate with your employees and your members and that you have empathy, because all of us have been in lockdown. A few of us have been going into the office, but for the most part, the general public has been, in the home. And so there's a lot of cabin fever going on. Some of the states have been reopening, and you've heard about some restaurant employees that are walking out and quitting because generally the public is they're a little bit on edge because they've been pent up, in their homes all this time. If you have an employee assistance program, you should make sure that you let their employees know about that and any other benefits that you have, because, all this time that they've been deemed essential, right, where some of their family members have been staying home, they've been coming into work. So you want to make sure that you communicate to your employees how much you value them and give them that assistance that they're looking for. Members are going to be looking at you on how you're handling the situation. How are you going to keep them safe, right? How well are you servicing their needs? And of course, because there's a lot of different, people from working from home, a lot of different workarounds and trying to give them the services, that you need to make sure that you're safeguarding their monies and of course, safeguarding their information. Conveying your safety concerns to them is your number one priority. So please make sure that you communicate frequently to your employees and to your members. And one of the things that you're going to have to determine is what are you going to do if the employees or the membership is not going to comply with your reopening requirements, right? So if you're going to require them to wear masks, you need to decide, well, what if they're coming to work or the members are coming into the credit union and they're refusing to wear masks? So that's something that the task force should meet about and talk about, is how we're going to communicate to our members. So next we're going to talk about robbery prevention, right? We're having an increase in, cash levels going on in our branches, and there's definitely a staffing impact. Some employees may not have been able to continue working because they had childcare issues or taking care of a loved one. Some branches may have closed that are in close proximity to each other. So you probably might have some staff that are deployed to different locations. Make sure that they know what the robbery procedures are for that specific location. Please inspect your robbery kits. Make sure that they're complete and up to date, that the contact information is current, and that, of course, that you want to make sure that all of your alarm systems and your surveillance systems have been recently tested. Touch base with your alarm company, the police, if you're in a complex like a strip mall, or if you are located in a restricted area on a SEG property. Make sure you are communicating with them. Do they have any concerns about you fully reopening for business? There's a lot that's unknown about the effects of COVID-19, the impact that the pandemic has had, a lot of stress going on. Besides the robbery procedures, reviewing those with your employees, I encourage you to also review security procedures, such as civil disturbance and also active shooter. So make sure it's not just the robbery training procedures that you review with them, but all security procedures. Okay, and next we're going to talk about the changes to the central liquidity facility. There's an interim final rule eliminating the 6-month waiting period for a new member to receive a loan, as well as the waiting period for a credit union to terminate its membership, and easing collateral requirements for certain asset securing loans. The NCUA is encouraging credit unions to join the CLF in order to help credit unions have sufficient access to liquidity. And you can go ahead and become a member of the CLF by filling out the application and contributing to the fund. One other thing that I want to stress that you want to make sure that you do is, a lot of us, have contingency funds planned, but have we tested them? We don't want that to fall through the cracks. You want to make sure that you go back to whoever your contingency fund is with and make sure everything is working and up to date. They tend to send information requests to you, such as updating signatures and things like that, certifying your business permits and things of that nature. So you want to make sure that you take care of all of that and not be caught unprepared. So we have our next polling question. Okay, so the next polling question is, has your CU accessed or tested its contingency funding source within the last 90 days? So it's either yes, no, or haven't thought about it, and you have 20 seconds to respond. Okay, I don't see the results. I know that it showed there briefly. There it goes. So 63% said yes, 13% said no, and 25% haven't thought about it. So for those of you that have not, I suggest that you go ahead and test your access to that. All right, next we're going to talk about the examiner outreach. You may have already spoken to your examiner about this, but for those that haven't, your examiner, you're supposed to schedule a time to talk with them from May 4th through May 18th. And that's not the first one. They're basically, the NCOA has come out and said that they want to assist credit unions, know what their needs are. So there's going to be a series of outreach where they're going to ask you questions. And the one that they're doing right now is basically on emerging credit risk. And I highly recommend that your CFO doesn't just answer the questions and give it to the auditor and have the auditor be the one to speak with the NCOA examiner. I recommend that someone senior, such as the CFO, be the actual person that sits through the interview, and then have the support of the head of the audit department or whomever is in charge with the normal liaison to the NCOA sit in on it. Because really what they're doing is, yes, they do, of course, want to help the credit unions, but they're also looking to see how prepared you are in handling the impact of the pandemic. And based on your answers, I put some sample questions that they're going to be asking you. Based on your answers, that's how they're going to respond to the amount of oversight that they're going to be having requests from you. So you want to make sure that they have every confidence that your credit union is prepared for this pandemic. Part of that is I'm going to talk about is the examiners, what they're going to be looking for. Some of the things that they might be asking for would be, strategic plan. How are you handling the erosion to your capital? Something that your task force should be doing is having multiple forecasts, planning from the worst case scenario to the best case scenario, and determining what are those triggers where you're going to, start, whatever your countermeasures are going to be to protect that erosion. The other thing that they're going to be looking for, my colleague talked about earlier, is your disaster recovery BCP plan, because more than likely they're going to be asking for information remotely versus an on-site examination. They're kind of, limited on the time that they can spend because they're on-site. So they don't do a deep dive, but in remote audits, they tend to ask for more information. So one of the things that they're going to be asking for is, did you document your exceptions and your remediations? And so I suggest that you retain the evidence, because a lot of us, our disaster recovery BCP plans, of course, they don't go as planned exactly. There are exceptions. So they want to see if it was properly addressed and remediated. So make sure that you keep your evidence to support that. And one of the things that they're also going to be asking for is, when you made those business operations decisions, such as relaxing, new account membership requirements, or making any threshold changes to your online banking, anything that you did to meet the members' needs, did you conduct a risk assessment? So if you didn't document any of these things, now's the time to start going back and making sure that you document them. Next, we're going to talk about the N2A regulatory release that came out on April 13th. And basically, they have a temporary final rule granting measures of regulatory relief to help ensure that federally insured credit unions remain operational and liquid. There's an interim final rule that temporarily defers real estate-related appraisals and evaluations under the agency's appraisal regulations because of the public health crisis. And of course, there's a final rule that increases the threshold level for appraisals not being required from $250,000 to $400,000 for those transactions. One of the things that I always recommend is to sign up for the N2A Express. It doesn't take, even though if you get them very frequently in your email inbox, it doesn't take that long to just glance and see. N2A has been really busy in trying to help the credit union industry and help the members. So I encourage you to sign up for those email alerts and just go through them when they come in. Don't just rely on, one person to distribute them out. Lastly, I want to talk about member education. Members are basically looking for peace of mind. And being there for your members will fulfill your mission, but it will also help you minimize your fraud losses. So I'm a big proponent of educating your members. And one of the best tools that you have to help them is risk alerts, right? Is getting them to sign up for text message alerts, email alerts. Whenever their password has been changed, they get an alert. So those are really great tools for your members. I encourage them to sign up, and then regularly review their account activity is very important. They're going to be hit with a lot of different fraud and scams that are going on. So you want to make sure that you heighten the measures that you have in detecting account takeovers. That's really big right now. So, the authentication that your employees do right now is really key. Make sure that the member is the one that's requesting for the person-to-person payment access. That's one that's a scam that's on the rise right now. It's not the member that's requesting it. It's the fraudster. So, make sure that you educate your employees as well. So we have our last poll question for my section, which is, does your credit union incorporate scam or fraud education on its homepage or COVID-19 resource page? So your choices are yes, no, or haven't thought about it. So you have 20 seconds to respond. Okay, great. So 88% have that. So that's wonderful. You want to make sure that you get that outreach out there. And some of the things that I've also recommended is recognizing fraudulent stimulus checks. I heard are out there circulating as well. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Next, we have Ben Farias. Ben is a former regulator and a very seasoned compliance professional who has served as the head of risk and compliance for many financial institutions. Ben has extensive experience in all aspects of regulatory compliance, so I'll hand it off to Ben.
Thank you, Radhika. We're going to talk about lending compliance considerations first. I'm sure you've all seen the news reports about the record high unemployment, about the supply chain disruption and people's livelihood being severely adversely impacted or just disappeared. And so that causes concerns on the regulatory compliance side. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is fair lending. And fair lending is something that we need to take very seriously. Fair lending, Equal Credit Opportunity Act violation is merits an automatic referral to the Department of Justice. And anybody who's been through that can tell you that that's very stressful. It's also very expensive because of the need to retain competent legal counsel. So I think probably the key component in terms of fair lending risk is to avoid unnecessary discretion. So your lending policies should be reviewed, and you should make sure that they provide for fair and equitable and uniform processes for approving and refinancing credit for collections. It's always good to remember that fair lending impacts the whole credit life cycle, not just originations, but administration of the credit and resolving the credit, especially if they become distressed. So collections need to be handled on a fair and equitable basis. So when you're negotiating for accommodation, somebody has come in and they're 2 or 3 payments down on their loan, make sure that when you're discussing and negotiating that you're not having any bias that appears to favor one protected class over another, or your non-protected classes versus protected classes. So, minorities, race, age, etc. Those are all things that you need to consider and review as these things are going through the pipeline. Review what's being done and make sure that you don't have any outliers that a regulator can come in and say, gee, it looks like, you have a bias that is unfavorable to Hispanics or to women. So keep those things in mind. Your collection guidelines should be clearly articulated and established in your policies and procedures and communicated clearly in training. Discretion regarding forbearance and accommodations. Again, avoid disparities when negotiating accommodations. Collections need to be aware of avoiding apparent disparities in the treatment of protected classes. So that can be anything from somebody who's coming in to discuss their delinquent loan, and you have a protected class and a non-protected class waiting to speak to a collection specialist or a loan officer, and you make the protected class wait while the non-protected class gets immediate access to the collection officer. So those things, you just need to have your eyes open and make sure that everybody is treated fairly. Age discrimination. We all know that COVID-19 impacts seniors more than it impacts younger people in the population. And so you need to make sure that that elders are being treated the same as everybody else. As far as other collection issues, and I'm sure a lot of your credit unions have lent for income property to individuals, or maybe some members actually own multifamily structures. But there's a tenant foreclosure protection that requires that you give 90 days notice if you're going to evict tenants from a rental property. So you need, when you're considering foreclosure, you need to ascertain, is there a renter in the property? And then make sure they get proper notice. If you're going to renegotiate the lease, you have to let leases run to term unless you renegotiate them. Use of medical information. Probably going to see folks coming in who've had the virus. Maybe they were out of work, and the reason that they need a loan is because they were ill. Be familiar with HIPAA and what information you can request when you're considering an application, and what information you should be talking about. Even if that information is offered freely by the applicant, know which forms of information you can use and can't use. And then there's UDAP, unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts or practices. Generally speaking, UDAP applies not only to marketing, but it also applies to collections, late fees, collection costs, etc. How you communicate with troubled asset borrowers. Keep in mind that FTC Section 5 applies in all those processes. So make sure, again, that there's nothing abusive going on when you're in a collection mode. Okay, poll number 5. Has your credit union performed a fair lending risk assessment within the last year? You have 20 seconds. Okay, let's see the results. So we have 38% said yes, 62% said no. Something you might want to consider going forward. Okay, consumer protection. This is the same information we were talking about before. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, poll question number 6. What happened to okay, for team members, okay, let's talk about for team members responsible for collections, have they received training on ACOA, tenants foreclosure, protections, HIPAA, UDAP, etc.? You have 20 seconds. Okay, let's see what the results are. They just flashed. Can you put them back up on the screen, please? So 67% said yes, which is great, and 33% said no. Training is very important. You know, keep your team aware of all these different implications as far as lending compliance and avoiding consumer harm. So let's talk about deposit compliance considerations. Government payments protection. You're all aware that, you know, retirement income, lots of federal government payments are protected from being used to cover overdrafts. You have to let them have 2 months of those balances in their account before you can take them for non-sufficient funds, etc. I think identity theft, you know, again, I think another speaker has already addressed identity theft in terms of there's a lot of scams that are, seems like there's no crisis that these scammers will not take advantage of. The other thing that you need to be aware of, I think we're going to see an increase of, is there are a lot of potential in there for financial elder abuse. We have a lot of people that are sequestered in care facilities that may be having somebody else as a designated payor, et cetera, that's handling their affairs. So you know, we might see people who become desperate to get their hands on more money are going to try to access, you know, our loved ones' financial assets. So need to make sure our employees are trained on how to identify elder financial abuse. Make sure you conduct regular training. A lot of state laws make financial institution staffers mandated reporters. And so make sure that when you have indications of elder financial abuse, that you take the appropriate steps and notify the proper state or local authorities. And remember, when there's elder financial abuse, there's a tie-in to AML, BSA, you know, SARA should be filed, you know, investigation should be conducted, and it should be documented. In summation, the general considerations for compliance in a post-pandemic world is your credit unions need to have a proactive consumer management system, compliance program. It's a lot better than reactive. So your program should be geared to identifying when the risks start to increase, as opposed to once you've already got an issue or issues that have arisen. So what you want to try to do is be predictive, not reactive. And most of all, through all of this, is you need to avoid the appearance of consumer harm, because compliance regulators will increase their focus on consumer harm when they conduct their compliance examinations. And now for poll question number 7, is your credit unions compliance management system proactive or reactive? And you have 20 seconds. And the response is, and it just flashed, 75% say proactive. That's fantastic. 25% no. You might want to take a look at that program and update it. And Radhika, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And last but certainly not least, we have Frank Santafonte, a certified anti-money laundering specialist with expertise in money service business banking and cannabis-related banking. And this year, Frank has also become our resident expert on the new California Consumer Privacy Act. So with that, I will hand it off to Frank.
Thank you, Radhika. The two topics that I'm going to be covering today are BSA and also facilities. So under BSA, first of all, has your staff been affected? So you want to take a look at your coverage, your staffing levels. Have you had to lay off any staff due to budget cutbacks? Are there staff that decided not to come back? Is there any staff that's out sick? Or is there any staff that's going to be going out on a Family Medical Leave Act? So they might be out for an extended period of time. So that's going to really bring to light any cross-training issues that you might have had. So what's your coverage? What's your backup? Do you have employees that can help each other out? It's going to impact, possibly impact the due dates. So for example, with reduced staffing, are you going to be able to meet the due dates to clear alerts and to file your SARs? So this is very important. So that leads me to my first polling question, which is, how would you rate your cross-training? Either excellent, there's no gaps in coverage; good, most employees are cross-trained; or poor, there's extensive gaps in coverage. You have 20 seconds. And the results. Okay, so most of the respondents said that it's good, but it could need some updating. So that would be definitely something to address to make sure that you can meet all of your due dates in time. The next topic I wanted to cover is transaction monitoring. So you'll need to take a look at your AML system and adjust it for any changes in member activity with regard to types and volume of activity. You might have to adjust your scenarios within the AML system, and it'll be more evident as we go further into the calendar how you have to adjust the scenarios and what you have to adjust, because then you can compare the changes in the customer activity or what you're seeing now post-COVID-19 versus what you saw pre-COVID-19. Another factor under transaction monitoring that you want to take a look at is for any business accounts, does the type and volume of activity that they're now conducting, is that reasonable with regard to the type of business that it is, and also if that business has reduced hours. So that'll bring to light any possible concerns that you should have under a BSA perspective. Under review, risk assessment for your transactions, there could be an increased usage of remote services. And so what might have been minor in the past might have now might be more of a major component. And then that's going to have an impact on your risk assessment. Products and service usage. Maybe there's some products and services that you didn't offer to members in the past, but now post-COVID-19, you have to introduce those new products and services, and then you'll have to run a risk assessment on each of those products and services. you might have to introduce those in order to be more competitive. And then another topic under risk assessment is the health and safety protocols. And that's something that you probably didn't have in your risk assessment in the past, but it'll probably be something that you'll have to incorporate into the risk assessment going forward. And another topic under BSA would be scams and fraud, and it's something that my colleagues had touched on before. You want to be on the lookout for unusual or large transactions, especially, again, with regard to elderly members. There's a number of different methods that you can use to try to identify those types of transactions, and it would be your frontline tellers who are more familiar with the daily transactions that the members conduct, wire operators that could double check the history of an account and ask some questions before sending out larger wires, especially if it's unusual for that particular client. And operations could also have a hand in it if they will review their daily balance change reports and see if there's any large fluctuations in balances, especially outgoing funds. And then BSA, of course, reviewing alerts. You'll also want to be on the lookout for increases in requests for HELOCs, for home equity line of credit, especially for elderly members. And you want to try to pick up on any clues that they might give that it's not really their idea, but they might be getting pressure from their family in order to apply for a home equity line. Moving on to facilities. For your branch and office locations, which branches are you going to keep open, which are going to remain closed, or which are going to reopen? And what about hours? Are any of those going to have reduced hours? And how are you going to notify your members? Are you going to do it by signs at the location, or through your website, or through browser searches? So for example, if someone is looking up your institution, is the correct hours and opening versus closing being reflected in the search results? And then also you can notify them through the phone line. When they call in, make sure that you have a message letting them know which branches are open or closed or which have reduced hours. Moving on to social distancing, make sure that the spacing of workstations and desks are appropriate so that not only is the staff protected, but that members, when they're coming into the branch, that they're also protected. And equipment sharing. Do you allow equipment sharing between staff and between the public? So how are you going to limit that in any way? Or what about disinfecting that equipment from time to time throughout the day? What is your interaction with the public? What protocols have you put in place? And how and when are you going to communicate that to the staff and to the public? So you want to review what the state and local guidelines are and implement that into your plan for reopening the branches. Back to you, Radhika.
Thank you so much. And as you can see from all our presenters today, one of the key, there's several key concepts that have rolled through every one of these discussions. One is keeping your documentation updated, be it your BCP plan, your risk assessment, or your policies and procedures. In our rush to manage this pandemic and implementing new procedures, we may not have been updating everything that needs to be updated. So that is a common thread along all of these presentations. Another one is to remind our members to stay vigilant and safe, either through managing their accounts, being aware of what's going on, and to stay in communication with you at the credit union, and posting things on your website is critical. So I want to take a moment right now to thank everyone for attending our webinar today and the expertise of my consultants. On behalf of our consulting team, we're truly appreciative of your time and your interest in these topics. We are here to help you out in any way possible. If there's topics that are of interest to you, please let us know. We know there are a lot of other things that you could have accomplished today during this past hour, but I'm grateful that you spent it with us. So with that, I'd like to ask the last polling question is, how can Parama help your credit union? Please contact us on business continuity, employee training, lending or deposit compliance, bank secrecy compliance, or attestation and internal audit services. If you are interested in any one of those, if you can answer the poll questions, we'd appreciate it. Okay. All right, so it appears that 100% of the poll says that they need assistance with lending and deposit compliance, so thank you for that. We have, I believe, just a minute or two for Q&A. If there is any questions, I believe you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Anyone? Or you could submit your questions via the Q&A.
We did have a question of, will the attendees get a slide presentation and recording?
Yes, we will email you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and a link to the recording along with the survey results. We will send them out to you on email and also include some possible next topics for the next Moving Forward series. Please stay connected with us via LinkedIn and Facebook to learn about our future events. If you have any questions, please reach out to Dan at paramapartners.com and feel free to request any specific topics at info@paramapartners.com, and I've listed our website and our phone number. Again, thank you and have a great rest of your day.